Keiko Nakamura sat alone at her kitchen table in the old house she had inherited from her ancestors. The soft, golden glow of the lights cast long shadows on the wooden floors, highlighting the vintage artwork and heirlooms that lined the walls. It was her 70th birthday today, but there were no grand celebrations, no laughter of children echoing through the house. Instead, a quiet stillness filled the air, a silence that seemed louder than ever before. As she sipped her tea, Keiko gazed out of the window at the maple trees swaying gently in the autumn breeze. The red and gold leaves drifted down, carpeting the ground below. It was a beautiful autumn day, yet something felt different, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. A sense of change was in the air, like the wind had carried a warning she couldn't hear but could certainly feel. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Keiko put her cup down, the sound of footsteps approaching growing louder. She knew it was Ayaka, her daughter-in-law. Ayaka had been unusually attentive this week, calling several times, asking if she needed anything for her birthday. Keiko had assured her that there was no need for anything extravagant. She had always preferred simplicity, just a quiet dinner with family. Ayaka entered, a bright smile on her face, holding a perfectly wrapped gift box. "Happy birthday, Keiko," she said, her voice bubbly, almost too cheerful. Keiko's sharp eyes noted the subtle nervousness in Ayaka's eyes, but she smiled politely, accepting the gift. "You didn't have to go this far," Keiko said as she carefully peeled the wrapping paper off, revealing a luxurious leather handbag, the kind of bag that cost more than she would ever spend on herself. Ayaka's smile grew wider, almost insistent. "It's nothing. You deserve it, Keiko. You're the most important person in the family," Ayaka said, her tone sweet, but Keiko noticed a slight edge to it, something unspoken but pressing. Keiko's fingers brushed against the soft leather, but something inside her stirred uneasily. She looked up at Ayaka, who was waiting almost expectantly. Keiko hadn't asked for anything, yet Ayaka had gone out of her way to choose something so extravagant. It wasn't like Ayaka to act this eager. Hiroshi, Keiko's son, appeared from the kitchen, a wide grin on his face. "What's this? Too much for Mom." "Ayaka," he chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. Keiko gave a small laugh, still eyeing the bag. "It's too much, but thank you, Ayaka. I appreciate it." Ayaka's smile faltered for just a second before she regained her composure. "I just wanted you to have something nice," she said softly. The evening passed without incident. Dinner was served, and Hiroshi's stories filled the room, but Keiko couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Ayaka seemed unusually focused on the gift, glancing over at the bag every now and then. Whenever Keiko offered to open it, Ayaka quickly suggested it should be saved for a special occasion, something more fitting. After the dinner ended and they left, Keiko remained in the quiet house, staring at the gift. A wave of unease washed over her, and it wasn't just about the extravagant gift. Ayaka's insistence, her over-the-top behavior, felt wrong. Keiko had lived a long life, and one thing she had learned was to trust her instincts. And right now, those instincts were screaming that there was something off about Ayaka's behavior. Keiko sat at her kitchen table, turning the gift over in her hands. It wasn't just the handbag, it was everything. The phone calls. The way Ayaka had pushed her to update her will, to sign legal papers she didn't fully understand. Keiko had always trusted Ayaka, but now she wasn't so sure. She knew she had to be careful. Something was changing in the air, and Keiko wasn't going to wait to find out what it was. The next few days dragged on in a haze of uncertainty. Keiko went about her routine, but her mind kept returning to that nagging feeling she couldn't shake. Ayaka's strange behavior, the insistence on the expensive gift, and those persistent calls urging her to update her will. Everything felt calculated, as if she were being subtly pushed into something she wasn't ready for. On the 4th day after her birthday, Keiko decided to visit her lawyer. The thought had been weighing on her mind for some time now, but after Ayaka's subtle pressure, it felt necessary. Keiko had built her life on the foundation of her family's old estate, and she knew that securing it was the only way to ensure her future. Yet, she had always been reluctant to make any drastic changes without a good reason. She walked into the law office, the cool air of the building stark against the warm spring day outside. Her lawyer, Mr. Tanaka, greeted her with his usual professional smile. He was an older man with sharp features, always impeccably dressed. As they sat in his office, Keiko didn't waste any time. "Tanaka-san," she began, her voice calm but resolute, "I need to review my will." The lawyer raised an eyebrow, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "Of course, Mrs. Nakamura, but I must ask, has anything changed in your circumstances? Any changes in your family, perhaps?" Keiko didn't answer immediately. She thought about Ayaka's persistent suggestions, the way her son Hiroshi had seemed less involved with family matters lately, and how Ayaka had pushed her so hard to make adjustments. Instead of answering, Keiko handed him the legal documents she had signed years ago, the ones that made her son the sole beneficiary. Tanaka scanned the papers, his eyes narrowing as he studied the language carefully. "I see you've made some updates here a few years ago," he said, his voice steady but measured. "You increased the amount of your life insurance policy. Did you approve these changes personally, Mrs. Nakamura?" Keiko hesitated, her heart sinking. She had signed the papers, but she couldn't remember much about the specifics. Ayaka had been there to help her with the paperwork at the time, and it seemed like a routine matter. She had trusted her daughter-in-law completely, as she always had. "I'm not sure," Keiko admitted. "I trusted Ayaka to explain it to me, but I don't recall all the details." Tanaka frowned slightly, a sense of unease creeping into his expression. "It seems there may have been some alterations made to your beneficiary information," he said carefully, placing the papers back on his desk. "This change was approved through the insurance company, but I can't find a direct record of you having personally authorized it. I suggest we look into this further." Keiko's stomach tightened. The thought that Ayaka might have manipulated her into signing something without her full understanding was terrifying. But it wasn't just the will or the insurance policy that concerned her. It was the growing sense that Ayaka had been calculating, maneuvering behind the scenes, and Keiko was beginning to fear what else her daughter-in-law might be capable of. Keiko left the office that afternoon with a heavy heart, the weight of her suspicions growing. The quiet unease that had gnawed at her was now a full-blown worry. It was one thing to wonder if Ayaka was being overly insistent, but it was another to realize that something much darker might be at play. That night after dinner, Keiko sat down with Hiroshi for a quiet conversation. As she poured tea into his cup, she studied his face closely. He seemed tired, distracted, and she could see the signs of strain in the way he carried himself. She'd always known Hiroshi was a good son, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't fully aware of what was happening around him. "Hiroshi," Keiko said gently, "I need to ask you something. Has Ayaka said anything about updating the family will? Or maybe about me making any changes to my assets?" Hiroshi looked up, startled by the question. He set his teacup down slowly. "I don't know, Mom. Ayaka's been handling a lot of things recently with the house and the finances. She said it would make things easier if we put everything under one name." Keiko's heart sank further. Everything under one name. Everything under Ayaka's name, perhaps. She pressed on. "I don't want to make any changes without understanding what's happening. You know how much this house means to me, Hiroshi. It's not just a place to live, it's my legacy." Hiroshi's expression softened, but there was a faint flicker of guilt in his eyes. "Mom, I understand. Ayaka's been handling things in a way that seemed efficient, I guess. But I'll talk to her. I'll make sure she's not doing anything you don't approve of." Keiko nodded slowly, her unease deepening. She had to get to the bottom of this before it was too late. She just wasn't sure what Ayaka's endgame was, or how far she would go to get what she wanted. That night, as Keiko lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that the world she knew was slipping away. The quiet house, the family she loved, all seemed to be on the edge of something dangerous, something she wasn't sure she could stop. But she wasn't ready to give up, not yet. She would find the truth, no matter where it led. Keiko woke up the next morning with a sense of urgency gnawing at her. Despite her best efforts to push it aside, the feeling of dread had taken root, and it was clear that the peaceful life she had built was now under threat. Ayaka's behavior had gone from simply odd to outright alarming, and Keiko knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. After breakfast, Keiko made up her mind. She needed to take action. Hiroshi had promised to talk to Ayaka, but Keiko knew that nothing would change unless she confronted the situation herself. She wasn't going to be passive. This was her life, her legacy, and she had every intention of holding on to both. She left her house that morning, walking with purpose toward the small office she had rented out for her personal affairs. It was a quiet, nondescript place, perfect for keeping matters of her life private. She had never really liked discussing family matters in public, but today she was ready to face whatever secrets Ayaka was hiding. Keiko sat at the desk and called her lawyer, Tanaka-san, to schedule an urgent meeting. The weight of the situation pressed on her chest, but she was determined. She wasn't going to let Ayaka steal everything from her. "Tanaka-san, I need your help," Keiko said when the lawyer picked up. Her voice was steady, but her mind raced. "I understand, Mrs. Nakamura. You mentioned earlier that you wanted to revisit the changes made to your documents. Would you like me to look into the insurance papers again? We can review them together." Keiko paused for a moment, thinking. "Yes, but it's more than just that. I think Ayaka may have made changes to more than just the will. I need you to investigate everything, every document she might have tampered with. I have to know the full extent of this." "I'll get on it immediately, Mrs. Nakamura. I'll have some updates for you soon. Please stay safe." Keiko ended the call and took a deep breath. She hadn't realized how much of her energy had been spent worrying until now. Now, at least, she was taking control. As she walked back home, the tension in her chest grew. She glanced at her phone and noticed a text from Ayaka. "How are you feeling today? I hope you're not overexerting yourself. Let me know if you need anything." Keiko's fingers trembled as she typed a short response. "I'm fine, just needed some time alone to think." The message felt like an insincere attempt to keep up appearances, and Keiko could almost hear the undertones of control in Ayaka's words. She had to act quickly. Later that afternoon, as the clock struck 3, Keiko decided it was time to pay Ayaka a visit. She wasn't going to wait for Hiroshi to step in. If Ayaka was going to continue with her scheme, Keiko needed to know exactly what she was up against. She arrived at Ayaka and Hiroshi's apartment building just before sunset. The sleek, modern high-rise stood in stark contrast to Keiko's traditional home, but she wasn't here to admire the architecture. She rang the doorbell, her heart pounding in her chest. A few moments later, Ayaka opened the door, her smile wide but tight. "Keiko-san, I didn't expect you today. Is everything all right?" Keiko forced a smile, stepping past Ayaka into the apartment. "I'm fine. I just wanted to check in on you both. I've been thinking a lot about the changes we discussed, and I have a few questions." Ayaka stiffened slightly at the mention of changes, but her composure never wavered. "Of course, Keiko-san. Anything you need, you know I'm here to help." They sat down in the living room, and Keiko wasted no time. She wasn't here for pleasantries. "Ayaka," Keiko began, her voice calm but firm. "I've been reviewing some of the papers you helped me with. The life insurance policy, the changes to the will. I'm not sure I remember all of it clearly. I've been thinking, and I'd like to go over everything again." Ayaka's smile faltered, but she quickly masked it with a soft laugh. Keiko-san, you're so thorough. You've always been like that, but you don't need to worry about it. Everything was taken care of as you asked. Keiko leaned forward, her gaze steady. I don't remember asking for all these changes, Ayaka. In fact, I don't remember signing some of these documents at all. I need you to tell me what exactly was changed and why. There was a long pause. Ayaka's hand trembled ever so slightly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Keiko-san, you've been under a lot of stress. Maybe you're misremembering things. Keiko's heart raced. No, Ayaka, I'm not misremembering. I trust my instincts. Something isn't right here. Ayaka's eyes flickered with something darker. Keiko, I'm only trying to help. You don't need to complicate things. You've made your wishes clear and I've followed them to the letter. You can trust me. Keiko studied Ayaka carefully, noting the quick breath she took and the slight twitch in her eye. She was hiding something and Keiko wasn't going to let it slide. I'm going to have everything reviewed, Keiko said, her voice unwavering. And when I find out what you've done, we'll deal with it accordingly. Ayaka's face hardened. She stood abruptly. I don't know what you're implying, Keiko, but I think you're overreacting. I've done nothing but care for you and your family. Keiko stood, too, her heart pounding in her chest. Caring doesn't involve stealing from me, Ayaka, and I won't let you get away with it. She turned and walked toward the door, leaving Ayaka standing in the middle of the apartment, her composure cracking at last. As Keiko stepped out into the hallway, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her lawyer, Tanaka-san. I've found something unusual. You'll need to come to the office. It's urgent. Keiko's pulse quickened. The truth was unraveling, and she was closer than ever to uncovering Ayaka's betrayal. Keiko arrived at Tanaka-san's office just after sunset, the fading light of the evening casting long shadows on the sidewalk. She felt the familiar weight of tension in her chest, but this time, there was something else, determination. Everything she had suspected, all the unease she had felt about Ayaka, was finally starting to come to light. Tonight, Keiko would face the truth, no matter how dark it was. When she entered the office, Tanaka-san was already waiting for her, his usually calm demeanor replaced by a serious look. Keiko took a seat across from him, her heart pounding in anticipation. Keiko-san, I've reviewed the documents you asked me to look at. Tanaka began, his voice steady but tinged with concern. It appears there have been several changes made to your will and life insurance policy that were never formally authorized by you. I found records of a call that was made to the insurance company, one in which your signature was apparently forged. The person on the other end of the line claimed to be you. Keiko felt her breath catch in her throat. She had feared something like this was happening, but hearing the confirmation was a blow she hadn't fully prepared for. So, someone has been forging my name? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Tanaka nodded gravely. Yes, the documents are quite detailed, and in addition to the changes to your life insurance, there was also a beneficiary change made on your behalf, one that lists Ayaka as the primary beneficiary of both the insurance and, surprisingly, a large portion of your estate. Keiko's blood ran cold. Ayaka, she had suspected this, but to hear it laid out so plainly made the betrayal feel like a slap across the face. Tanaka continued, flipping through some more papers before looking up. Keiko-san, I have also found something else. A second set of documents, ones I didn't expect to find, are showing some financial transfers, even withdrawals made from your accounts. These were done without your knowledge, and they seem to be connected to Ayaka's actions as well. Keiko felt dizzy. The walls seemed to close in around her, and the room grew heavy with the weight of the truth. Ayaka had been slowly but surely working to strip her of everything she had built over the years. The house, the savings, the family legacy, and for what? So Ayaka could claim it all for herself, to take control of everything Keiko held dear. Are you suggesting that Ayaka is not only forging my documents but also taking money from my accounts? Keiko asked, her voice now steady, though it trembled with a mix of anger and fear. Tanaka nodded solemnly. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. And given the timeline of these activities, it seems she was planning this for some time. She may have used her position as your daughter-in-law to manipulate you, gain your trust, and then take advantage of your kindness and vulnerability. Keiko closed her eyes for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. She had always seen Ayaka as a part of the family, someone she had accepted as her own. To think that this young woman, whom she had welcomed with open arms, was now trying to destroy her, steal everything from her, felt like a betrayal that went beyond words. I need to confront her, Keiko said, her voice full of resolve. I need to ask her why, I need to hear it from her. Tanaka didn't hesitate. I think that's the right decision, but I urge you to be cautious. If she's done this much, she may not hesitate to lie, manipulate, or even become aggressive when faced with the truth. Let me help you. We can call the authorities if needed, but please, Keiko-san, be careful. Keiko nodded, standing up from the chair. I will. Thank you, Tanaka-san. I have to do this. I'm not going to let her take everything from me. As Keiko left the office, she felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her like never before. Ayaka had crossed a line, and now Keiko was going to hold her accountable. She was going to confront her daughter-in-law with the truth, with the documents, with the evidence, and she wasn't going to back down. Keiko made her way back to Ayaka and Hiroshi's apartment. Her steps were firm, each one filled with the purpose of a woman who had been betrayed but was determined to reclaim her life. She wasn't going to let Ayaka's web of lies and deceit ruin everything she had worked so hard to build. As Keiko reached their apartment building, she saw Ayaka standing outside, her expression as carefully neutral as ever. But when she saw Keiko approaching, a flicker of surprise crossed her face. She quickly masked it with a forced smile. Keiko-san, what brings you here? I wasn't expecting you today. Ayaka's voice was too smooth, too controlled. Keiko could tell she was already on edge. I need to talk to you, Keiko said, her voice low but firm. Inside, now. Ayaka hesitated for a moment but then nodded, stepping aside to let Keiko in. The apartment felt cold as Keiko walked in, her eyes scanning the space as if seeing it for the first time. The lavish decorations, the expensive furniture, the life Ayaka had built on the lies she had been feeding Hiroshi and Keiko. Keiko didn't waste time. I know what you've been doing, Ayaka, she said, her voice sharp with anger. I know about the forged documents. I know about the withdrawals from my accounts. I know you've been planning to steal everything from me for months. Ayaka's face froze, her eyes widening ever so slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. I don't know what you're talking about, Keiko-san. You must be mistaken, she said, her voice trembling just enough to give away her fear. Keiko pulled the stack of documents from her bag, slamming them onto the coffee table between them. You're lying. Here's the proof, the life insurance policy, the forged will, the money transfers. You thought you could get away with it all, didn't you? Ayaka's eyes flickered to the papers, and for a moment, Keiko saw something that resembled panic in her face. But then, in a swift movement, Ayaka stood up, her eyes burning with defiance. You don't understand, Keiko, Ayaka spat, her voice rising. I did what I had to do. You were holding us back. Hiroshi and I have been drowning in debt, and I couldn't let that continue. Your life was just an obstacle. You're old, Keiko. You're not living your life anymore. I was doing you a favor. Keiko's blood ran cold. A favor? You were planning to kill me, Ayaka. You were going to let me die for money, for a house, for my legacy. Don't you dare tell me that's a favor. Ayaka's composure shattered, and she stepped back, her eyes wild. You don't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like to be trapped, to have everything falling apart around you. She screamed, her voice breaking. This was the only way. Keiko stood tall, unflinching. You made your choice, Ayaka, and now you'll have to face the consequences. Just as Keiko spoke those words, the sound of sirens echoed through the streets. The police had arrived, and with them, Keiko's long-awaited justice. The police arrived moments after Keiko's chilling words, their sirens piercing the air outside the apartment building. Ayaka stood frozen, her wild-eyed expression flickering with a mixture of disbelief and fear. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't anticipated that Keiko would be the one to expose her. But there was no turning back now. Keiko stepped back from the coffee table, where the pile of damning documents lay. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but her resolve was ironclad. Ayaka had tried to ruin her life, but Keiko was determined to make sure that her story ended with justice. Not manipulation, not murder. The apartment door burst open, and 2 police officers stepped inside, their eyes immediately locking onto Ayaka. She stood there, her face ashen, her chest heaving with heavy breaths. The officers were calm, but the tension in the room was palpable. "Keiko Nakamura," one of the officers asked, his voice steady. Keiko nodded, pointing to the coffee table where she had laid the documents. "These papers are evidence of forgery, financial theft, and an attempted murder," Keiko explained, her voice unwavering. "Ayaka has been systematically draining my accounts, forging my signature, and altering my will to steal my assets. She also attempted to poison me by putting rohypnol in a bottle of wine meant for me." The officer glanced at Ayaka, his eyes narrowing. "Is this true, ma'am?" he asked. Ayaka didn't answer right away. Her lips trembled and her eyes darted from the documents to the officers and back to Keiko. She opened her mouth to speak, but her words caught in her throat. The truth was inescapable, and her carefully constructed facade was crumbling. Keiko stepped forward, her gaze never leaving Ayaka. "You thought you could steal everything from me, didn't you? You tried to manipulate Hiroshi, poison me, and take my legacy, but you underestimated me. You didn't know I could fight back." Ayaka finally spoke, her voice strained and frantic. "I was just trying to solve our problems. You don't understand. Hiroshi and I were drowning in debt. I couldn't keep living like that with no way out. I thought if I could just get rid of you." "By killing me," Keiko interrupted sharply. "You thought you could kill me, and then everything would be fine for you. That's how far you were willing to go." Ayaka's face twisted in anger, but there was an edge of panic in her eyes. "You don't get it. You have everything I've ever wanted. I was just trying to make it better for us. Hiroshi was always too weak to do anything. I was the one who had to fix things. But now—" Her voice broke off, and she staggered back as if the full weight of her actions had suddenly hit her. The officer moved closer to Ayaka, gently placing his hand on her arm. "Ma'am, you need to come with us. You're under arrest for the attempted murder of Mrs. Nakamura, along with several counts of forgery, theft, and fraud." Ayaka's face drained of color as she was cuffed and led toward the door. She didn't resist, but the anger in her eyes was unmistakable. Her entire plan, everything she had worked toward, was slipping away. Keiko watched as the officers escorted Ayaka out of the apartment, her mind racing. The sense of betrayal had almost broken her, but standing here now, knowing that the truth was finally out in the open, gave her a feeling of liberation. She had faced the darkness head-on and had come out victorious. When the officers left, Keiko stood in the apartment, taking in the silence that followed. It was over. Ayaka's schemes had been exposed, and she would now have to face the consequences of her actions. Keiko had reclaimed her power, her dignity, and her life. The aftermath. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The police investigation uncovered more evidence of Ayaka's deception, including her attempt to kill Keiko with the poisoned wine, which was traced back to the rohypnol found in her system. The forged documents were part of a wider scheme to manipulate Keiko's wealth and control her finances, including the life insurance policy and the property deeds that Ayaka had altered in her name. During this time, Keiko's relationship with her son, Hiroshi, was strained but began to heal. Hiroshi was devastated by the realization of what his wife had done. He had been blind to her manipulation, but seeing the full scope of Ayaka's betrayal shook him to his core. Despite everything, Keiko remained resolute. She had been through too much to be broken by betrayal. As the trial for Ayaka's crimes began, Keiko gave her testimony with calm and strength, recounting the entire sequence of events with clarity and precision. She wasn't just telling her story. She was reclaiming her life, ensuring that Ayaka would never have the power to hurt her or anyone else again. The trial was a public spectacle. The courtroom was filled with people, some of whom had heard whispers of Ayaka's manipulative ways, others who were shocked by the depth of her crimes. Keiko took the stand, her voice unwavering as she recounted the months of manipulation and the final confrontation that had brought everything to light. Tanaka-san presented the forged documents, the financial records, and the recording of Ayaka's confession. The prosecutor's case was airtight. Ayaka had no defense, and the jury deliberated for only a short time before delivering their verdict, guilty on all charges. Ayaka was sentenced to life in prison for attempted murder, fraud, theft, and forgery. She would spend the rest of her life behind bars, her actions forever marked by the scars of her betrayal. Epilogue: A New Beginning. Months passed, and Keiko's life slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy. She sold the property that Ayaka had attempted to steal, using the money to set up a foundation that helped victims of financial abuse, particularly elderly individuals who had been manipulated by family members. Keiko found solace in helping others. She spoke at local events, sharing her story and raising awareness about the dangers of financial abuse. Her experience had made her stronger, and she became a beacon of hope for others who had been betrayed by those they trusted most. As for Hiroshi, he worked hard to rebuild his relationship with his mother. The guilt he carried for not seeing Ayaka's true nature never fully left him, but Keiko forgave him. It wasn't easy, but they were family, and family meant something more than the lies and betrayals that had once torn them apart. One evening, as Keiko sat on her porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset over her garden, she smiled to herself. The storm had passed, and though the scars of the past would never completely fade, they no longer defined her. She was no longer the woman who had been quietly manipulated. She was a survivor, a fighter, and the author of her own future. And that future was her own. Months after Ayaka's conviction, Keiko had settled into a new rhythm of life. She had found peace again, but the quiet was now different. It was empowering. She had come to terms with the deep betrayal she had faced, and in the process, she had rediscovered a strength she hadn't known she had. Her story, her survival, had become something of a beacon for others, especially older adults who were vulnerable to manipulation and abuse. Her new life was far from the life she had once envisioned, but it was hers, and that was enough. A new purpose. Keiko's new foundation, legacy of truth, had become her passion. It focused on helping elderly people who had been financially abused, often by their own families. Keiko traveled to local community centers, giving talks and offering legal resources to those who had nowhere to turn. She had become a symbol of resilience for those who had been manipulated and left behind, just as she had once been. One afternoon, she sat in a small community hall, addressing a group of elderly men and women, some with families and some without. They sat, eager to hear her story, and Keiko could see the hope in their eyes as she spoke. "I know many of you feel as though you've been left behind, betrayed or forgotten," she began, her voice steady and strong. "I know because I've been there, but I'm here to tell you that it's never too late to fight for what's yours. Your voice matters and you are not alone. She shared her story, not just the pain of betrayal, but also the triumph of standing up and taking control of her life again. She told them how, despite the loss, despite the manipulation and deception, she had learned to trust herself again, and that had made all the difference. Keiko had found her calling. She was no longer a passive victim in her own story. She was the author, and she was rewriting the narrative not just for herself, but for others who needed a voice of reason, a reminder that justice could be served even after years of silence. A quiet justice. Keiko's relationship with her son, Hiroshi, was on the mend. Though it would never be the same, they had come to terms with the events that had unfolded. Hiroshi visited regularly, still filled with regret, but Keiko reassured him, telling him that healing was a process. He had made mistakes, but he was learning, and she was proud of him for that. One evening, as Hiroshi sat beside her at the dinner table, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it briefly and then looked up at her with a hesitant smile. "Mom," he said, clearing his throat, "I got a message today from an old friend, someone I hadn't heard from in years. He said he saw your story on the news." Keiko raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What did he say?" "He said Keiko Nakamura is a force, her strength is inspiring, she's the kind of person I want to help." Keiko felt a swell of pride. It was the first time someone outside of her immediate circle had reached out to her for guidance, for validation. "You know, Mom," Hiroshi continued, "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about Ayaka and what happened. I never truly understood what you went through, but now I do. I see you not just as my mother, but as a woman who fought back." Keiko smiled, a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. "I've always fought back, Hiroshi. It's just that sometimes we don't realize how strong we are until we're forced to face the truth, and sometimes the truth comes in the most painful of ways." Her son nodded silently, a deep understanding settling between them. The ripple effect. Keiko's foundation flourished. She began to collaborate with other organizations, creating workshops and outreach programs to educate both young and old about the dangers of financial manipulation. People started to seek her out not just for legal advice, but for her wisdom, her strength, and her courage. Keiko had become a symbol of quiet justice, not through loud confrontations or public retribution, but through the way she had reclaimed her life piece by piece. She had turned her personal tragedy into something meaningful, something that would outlive her. As time went on, Keiko began to form relationships with the people she helped. There were elderly women who had been left destitute by manipulative children, men who had been duped by false promises of security. But Keiko was there for them, just as she had learned to be there for herself. One day, as Keiko sat in a small cafe with a woman named Yoshiko, a widow who had been swindled out of her life savings by a close family member, Yoshiko took her hands in hers, tears welling in her eyes. "Keiko-san," she said softly, "you've shown me that there is still hope. I thought I had lost everything, but now I see there is a way forward. I can rebuild." Keiko smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "You have everything you need to rebuild, Yoshiko. The strength is already inside you. You just need to trust it." And as Yoshiko nodded, Keiko felt a deep satisfaction. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever felt powerless, everyone who had ever been silenced by fear. And that was a fight worth every ounce of energy. The final chapter. As Keiko stood on the balcony of her home, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The storm that had raged in her life had passed, and though the scars remained, they were no longer wounds. They were reminders of her strength. Keiko had once been a quiet woman, content to fade into the background of her own life. But now she stood tall. She had faced the darkness, uncovered the lies, and emerged victorious. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a fighter. And as long as she had breath in her body, she would continue to fight for justice, for truth, and for the dignity of all those who had been wronged. Her journey had been long, but it had been worth every step. And as the night fell around her, Keiko Nakamura knew that the next chapter of her life was just beginning. It had been a year since Ayaka's conviction, and Keiko's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. The events that had unfolded had shaken her to her core, but they had also given her a new sense of purpose. Every day now, she worked tirelessly for her foundation, helping others navigate the darkness of financial abuse and manipulation. Her own story had become a beacon of hope for many who had felt powerless, just as she once had. Keiko had built something meaningful, something lasting, but even more importantly, she had rebuilt herself. The first annual gala. Keiko sat at her desk, reviewing the final details for the first annual Legacy of Truth Gala. It was going to be a night of celebration, but also a night of reflection. The foundation had grown significantly in the past year, and this event would mark a significant milestone. It wasn't just about raising money. It was about showing the world that those who had been victims of manipulation and abuse could fight back, could win, and could thrive. As she read through the guest list, Keiko's mind drifted to the people who had stood by her throughout this journey. Tanaka-san, her lawyer, who had always believed in her from the start. Hiroshi, her son, who had finally come to terms with everything and become a better man for it. And even the survivors she had helped, who now saw her not just as a mentor, but as a sister in arms. For all the pain Ayaka had caused, Keiko had found a way to turn it into something positive. She wasn't just healing, she was changing lives. And that, more than anything else, gave her a sense of pride. The gala night. The evening of the gala arrived, and Keiko stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her dress. She had chosen a simple, elegant black gown, a statement of grace and resilience. As she ran a hand through her hair, she saw her reflection, a woman who had once felt powerless, but now stood strong in her own skin. When she arrived at the venue, the room was already buzzing with energy. The hall was decorated with soft lighting, flowers, and photographs of the people whose lives had been changed by the foundation. Keiko's heart swelled with pride as she greeted guests, her eyes meeting the faces of people who had once felt as lost as she had. Hiroshi stood beside her, his presence comforting as ever. "Mom, I'm so proud of you," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "I never imagined you'd do something like this. You've completely changed the way I look at everything." Keiko smiled at him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We all have our moments of awakening, Hiroshi. Sometimes it takes the worst to make us realize what we're truly capable of." As the night unfolded, Keiko took the stage to speak. She had never been one for public speaking, but this was different. This was her story, her truth. She stood at the podium, her hands steady as she looked out over the crowd. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice carrying through the room. "This foundation, Legacy of Truth, is not just a project. It's a testament to the strength we all have within us to fight back, to reclaim what is ours, and to live a life of dignity and justice." She paused, letting the words sink in. "When I started this journey, I had no idea where it would lead. I was a woman who had been betrayed by someone I trusted. But I learned that trust is something you build, brick by brick, choice by choice. And if you've been broken, it's not the end of your story. It's the beginning of a new chapter." The room was silent, and Keiko could feel the energy in the air, the collective understanding of everyone who had fought their own battles. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the work we've done, but the work we'll continue to do. We will keep fighting for the vulnerable, the silenced, and the oppressed. We will show the world that no one is ever too old, too weak, or too broken to stand up for what is right." The applause was thunderous. Keiko smiled, feeling the warmth of the crowd's support. This was her legacy now, Not the wealth she had once thought defined her, not the family that had betrayed her, but the lives she had touched, the voices she had helped amplify. A new kind of freedom. As the gala continued, Keiko found herself reflecting on her journey. There had been moments of doubt, moments when she thought she might never make it out of the darkness. But those moments were in the past now. She had come through the fire stronger than ever before. After the gala, as Keiko sat on her balcony once again, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The fight had been long and painful, but it had shaped her into someone she was proud of. She wasn't just a survivor anymore, she was a warrior. And now, as she looked at the future, Keiko knew that this was just the beginning. There were more battles to fight, more lives to change, more people to help. She wasn't just living for herself anymore, she was living for the people who needed her. With the foundation thriving, Keiko had finally found her true purpose. And as she watched the stars appear in the sky, she made a quiet promise to herself. I will never stop fighting for justice. I will never stop fighting for truth. The next chapter of her life was already unfolding, and Keiko was ready to embrace it fully, knowing that she had the power to shape her destiny and to help others do the same. The legacy of a survivor wasn't just something she carried, it was something she created, and it would last far beyond her own lifetime. The future was hers, and it was bright.